What's up guys, the patch notes just dropped, and the Druid's gonna pop off in Season 7. Rather than going through all the notes, I'm just gonna show you the ones that I thought were the most important, and I categorized them by the types of builds that they're gonna affect. Some of these changes are insane. So first off, we'll get into everything, but let me just show you, because you don't realize just how strong lightning bolts are about to be. So, not only do we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 changes related to lightning bolts specifically, but there are also multiple other changes that could affect them indirectly. I'll have to do some testing on the PTR to see if Werewolf stuff is going to affect the lightning bolts, but at least in the past, when you were wearing Tempest Roar, certain lightning abilities would get the increased damage, so we'll have to see. But we're also finally getting a bunch of upgrades to ultimate abilities, which means I can finally bring back my Infinite Lacerate build, and I'm pretty sure I can even bring back the Infinite Cataclysm build. Companions are probably going to be really strong this season because they finally fixed the tag issue that they've had. And same with this, I believe some of these other ones are going to affect companions indirectly. For example, I think when we change our wolves into werewolves, we'll finally be able to get werewolf bonuses on them, and that could be a big upgrade. We've also got the possibility for bulwark spam to come back, and we might actually have some decent poison builds. Most notably, probably some combination of Shred and Grizzly Rage. That way you're applying damage with rabies and multiple other sources of poison, but they all synergize because you're doing werewolf damage with all of them. All werewolf builds in general are getting a lot stronger this season, and we already saw some buffs to Tornado previously, so Lightning Storm, Tornado, and any other storm skills should be doing really well. Speaking of storm skills, we also have Hurricane that's getting some buffs, and we had another big buff during the mid-season. And they're not very notable, but there are some changes that will affect Earth skills, and we'll get into those in a minute. First off, I want to start with everything that affects lightning bolts, because I think this will be the strongest build for Druid in Season 7. So I think the most important one here is Runeworker's Conduit. So before, when you got critical strikes with storm skills, it would give you like this little aura that would cause a lightning bolt to come down and strike an enemy every once in a while, and you would do increased damage with your lightning bolts. That's great and all, but we didn't really have a way to scale them before. Now, not only do we have a way to scale them, but now critical strikes with storm skills cause lightning bolts to periodically strike close enemies for 3 seconds. That's what it was doing before, each dealing lightning damage. Your lightning bolt damage is increased by 50%, so before it was 40%, okay? But now it's 50% for every 100 willpower you have. Let that sink in for a second. That is an insane multiplier. A typical Druid's probably going to have at least 2,500 willpower. And a little side note here, since this is scaling off of willpower, Tempest Roar has its willpower changed from a flat number to a percentage. So now Tempest Roar is equaling with Vasilis in the terms of willpower, which is a very nice boon to all of our werewolf builds, because Tempest Roar is kind of a requirement. Another big change is Mjolnir Ring. So before, when Cataclysm was active, you got unlimited spirit and 100% increased damage. Now you're getting both of those things, and Cataclysm is receiving your lightning bolt benefits. So that means any additive tempering, any multiplicative from all of these new increases is going to apply to your Cataclysm as well. So that means not only will Mjolnir Ring likely end up in any of the lightning bolt builds, but it will likely also go into any dedicated Cataclysm builds as well. Another huge one is that we got a new rune. This rune word only costs 20 offering, which is extremely low. It does 220% weapon damage, which is quite high, and it makes one lightning bolt hit a nearby enemy. But it's also got overflow, which makes you spawn more of these. Now let's do some math for a second here. Every 100 offering you're able to get is going to be 5 lightning bolts. And just as an example, one of the ones that was buffed recently is Seer, and this does 300. So we're getting 15 lightning bolts at 220% weapon damage from one rune. And this can happen every 3 seconds if you're attacking fast enough. We also got a change to Charged Atmosphere. This was always one that wasn't that great to get because it would drop a lightning bolt, and it was only every 14 seconds, and it only did a little bit of damage. But now, it's increasing our lightning bolt damage by 10%. Now, I'm assuming this stacks up to 30%, so this is just a 30% multiplier we can get. But even if it's just 10%, that's just 1 point it takes to get a 10% increase. Now, the Overload boon was changed, and there were actually quite a few changes to all of the boons, but they were mostly just buffs. I might actually cover those at the end of the video. But for Overload specifically, it used to do a little AoE lightning damage, but it didn't hit the single target that you were hitting, so for bosses it was useless. It was also a lucky hit and not that great. But now this is an extremely good utility pickup for almost any build. Dealing storm damage also applies an additional 20% poisoning damage over 5 seconds. Notice there's no lucky hit chance there. That means a build like Boulder that's using Hurricane is going to apply poison automatically, so we don't have to deal with the terrible lucky hit chance Boulder that can never apply poison consistently. Thank Jeebus. But as an interesting addition, Lucky Hit dealing poison damage has up to a 1% chance to summon a lightning bolt on the target, dealing 120% damage. Now, I've got to say, this one seems a little bit underwhelming. Now, I think 1% chance might be a little bit low. Maybe they need to up this to 5 or 10%. But either way, it could be a nice addition to add a little bit of damage to lightning bolt builds. This one's not very important, but Keeper got a buff 10% to 15%, so it's, you know, it's a decent upgrade. Now, this aspect, Electrified Claws, is one that you'd probably build your build around. Now, with this one, I'm thinking about using Claw and Maul and alternating back and forth. This will be good as a shapeshifting build that's going to give you a lot of additional bonuses, and you're going to get high lucky hit chance, which will trigger some of the other bonuses as well. I'm not sure I would bother with this for some of the other builds, because there's a new bonus now with the Innate Blood Howl, where you're getting 25% increased damage as long as you stay in werewolf form. That, on top of the fact that you can use something like the buffed up Grizzly Rage, along with the buffed up Lupin Ferocity, means that I'm not sure if I would even bother going with the shapeshifting. But either way, this gives you a 40% increased damage to your lightning bolts. So depending on how much space you have, it might be worth it to have this on regardless. Not to mention the fact that it makes your lightning bolts stun enemies, which is really nice. Now I'm going to skip down to the werewolf area because since we're talking about lightning bolts, some of these might apply, assuming the lightning bolts can take the damage from werewolf. So first off, we have a new unique amulet. This one has percentage willpower, werewolf critical strike damage, movement speed while shapeshifted into a werewolf, plus ranks to feral aptitude, and the value of your lupine ferocity's critical strike damage is increased to 100 to 150% when consecutively critical striking. Now, I've got to say this is somewhat confusing, so I'll have to test this in PTR and see what it actually means, because if it said increased by 100 to 150%, then I might understand it a little bit better, because lupine ferocity currently has a 100% bonus, so increasing it to 100% doesn't seem to be very good, so I'm sure that's not the case. Not to mention, we also have Mad Wolf's Glee, which can increase this even more. So saying increased to is very confusing. But comment below and let me know what you think this means. Either way, could be an option, especially as a placeholder if you don't have anything else. I already mentioned the willpower change on Tempest Roar. Now, a nice bonus for Shred is that Blurred Beast now increases your damage automatically. You don't have to have the dash, but it does make your first dash hit up to 4 additional strikes based off of the distance traveled, which is pretty cool. I saw the video during the live stream and it looked really neat. I also already mentioned the increased damage from Blood Howl, and Blood Howl has always been fairly useful in builds, but a lot of times you were using it to get your defensive passives, and the skill itself didn't really do that much, so I'm glad it got a little bit of a buff. For Hurricane, we got this interesting aspect that makes it to where casting Hurricane also spawns a smaller Hurricane on your wolves for 8 seconds. These Hurricanes deal 15% of the Hurricane's damage for each active wolf. Now this is another one where I need a little clarification, because this could be increased damage for each wolf. So first wolf would be 15%, second wolf would make it 30%. Or it could just mean that this is a 15% damage circle on each wolf. I'm going to assume on each wolf because the other way is super OP. Also, just a little note, Hurricane can be cast while moving now. Not a big deal, but somewhat useful. So we finally got an improvement to Obsidian Slam. Every 10th kill will cause your next Earth skill to overpower is what it's been for a while. And the reason that's not great is because it doesn't work on bosses, and 10 kills is quite a bit. So now every 6th cast will cause your next Earth skill to overpower. That is much better. This will be very nice for builds like Boulder. We also got a change to Survival Instincts. They're leaning more into the overpower for Earth builds. So before it would give you increased damage based on your difference in health between you and the enemy. Oh, and you can't see this, so I'm going to move it up here. In fact, just in case you didn't see these other ones, I'm going to move them over as well. All right, so now while in Werebear form, you deal 30% increased damage or 45% when you're at full life. So that's basically a 45% increase. But in addition to that, you have 1% increased overpower damage up to 25%. So that's another 25% for every 1% difference in current life percent and fortified life percent between you and the enemy. Now, again, I could take this to mean 2 different things. I'm assuming it means that life percentage and fortified life percentage added together can total to 25%. But it is possible that they mean this could be 50% more, 25% for each. I'm not 100% sure, but let me know what you guys think. Now for companion builds, we got this changed to the Sarun. So Summoned Spirit Wolf now benefits from summon and companion bonuses. That means that this is going to get the buff from all of our companion build stuff. And because these wolves count towards shepherds as well, it's going to be a very nice thing to have in any companion build. Now we have a few other things we might be able to do. So now the damage from Innate Earthen Bulwark, which is the one that does damage, will scale with the skill ranks into that ability. So it's entirely possible that this might be able to scale to a point that it could do some real damage. I don't expect it to be crazy, but maybe. And whoops, I doubled up on that one. All right, Toxic Claws is getting a change. So you saw that they changed the spirit boons. So we don't need poison for most builds from Toxic Claws anymore. So now what they're doing is increasing the amount of damage this does for Shred and Lacerate. Now I still don't know if 16% of the base damage is going to be that relevant, but considering the direction they're going with a few of these other ones, it might actually add a decent amount of poison damage. They also changed Virulent. It is now no longer a utility aspect, it is an offensive aspect. So previously it basically just reduced your cooldown of rabies. Now it reduces your cooldown of rabies, but you're now also going to deal 50% increased damage to enemies affected by rabies. I'm a little confused here because they said 25% and then they said 25 to 50%. I'm assuming they just mean 25 to 50%. We also got some damage increase while in Grizzly Rage. And as you might know, we have an aspect for Grizzly Rage that makes you apply poison with critical hits. That also increases poison damage. So with the increased to Grizzly Rage damage, the increased poison damage from that aspect, the fact that there's multiple other sources of poison being added in and buffed, there may be a really good poison shred build that we can actually do. And they finally changed Titan Malice. Before, you had to have 3 enemies nearby to deal 45% increased damage. Now, while a poisoned enemy is nearby, you deal 35% increased damage. So this works on bosses for 35%, plus an additional 5% for each additional poisoned enemy up to 4. So now at maximum, it's doing 55% more damage. So that's 55% total instead of the 45%, and we're getting 35% guaranteed on bosses. Oh, I almost forgot the new additions to ultimates. So we got a couple of aspects that actually work for ultimates. But first off, we got a buff to Lacerate itself. So it's an increase to the damage from 560 to 600. And now at rank 5, Lacerate damage is increased by 40% of your critical strike damage bonus. Now that allows us to actually scale this damage really well. Also for one of our legendary Paragon nodes, Ancestral Guidance was changed to allow ultimates to do 1% increased damage per spirit when cast. Now that's actually pretty nutty, because if you go for maximum spirit, you could have over 150 spirit. That could be 150% damage increase for an ultimate. And for the aspects, we got one that gives casting an ultimate skill increases your ultimate damage by 15.5%, up to 155% at 10 stacks. Once you're at 10 stacks, your cooldown and this bonus are reset. So that's really good if you're going to be spamming your ultimate, which we could definitely do with Lacerate. And then finally, we got one that gives us 4 additional ultimate skill ranks, which is very good. And casting an ultimate skill increases your damage by 30% for 8 seconds. Now I'm assuming this doesn't stack, but if you can overlap and get additional stacks of this, that would be really good. But just the fact that it gives 4 skill ranks and ultimate scale so well, this is a must-have if you're going to do a dedicated ultimate build. All right, and I did say I was going to put the spirit boons at the end of the video, so I'm going to show these to you guys before we head out. So we finally got some deer buffs, which means we won't always take the damage reduction now. So 5% increased damage to enemies for 5 seconds after they attack you. That's just a little bit of a damage buff. I probably wouldn't take this in most cases, but it's at least better than 480 thorns on a class that doesn't really have a thorns build. We also got a change to Gift of the Stag, which before gave 40 maximum spirit. Now you get 40 maximum spirit and you gain 5 spirit every second. For Scythe Talons, they added a 15% lucky hit chance. It's kind of whatever, but better than nothing. Energize is now, instead of giving you 30 spirit, going to give you full spirit, which is pretty insane. We already talked about Obsidian Slam. We already talked about Overload. And that's it for the spirit boons. Now, right now I'm super hyped for PoE 2, but this just got me rehyped for Diablo Season 7. So I will definitely be putting out the builds I talked about for Season 7. And as usual, I update my best guides. If you're still playing Season 6, don't forget to go to the link below the video because I've got all of the updated Druid builds for Season 6 as well. But make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Daddy Druid out.